Oh dear, back to the 80s again. Do you remember high-speed dubbing? The facility that allowed some twin decks to run at twice the normal speed and copy a tape in half the time it usually took. Well, it was immensely popular, wasn't it, through the 80s and on into the 90s, and even into the 2000s, by which time some true crap was being produced that would do it. Well, it wouldn't really do it because some of it was DC bias, and they sounded bloody terrible by and large. Now, this particular offering is made by Sharp, and each mechanism has its own motor. The trim pots for the speed, there are two of them for each motor, of course, and they're up here on the circuit board. And it's a pig of a job to get the high speed side of it right. Simply because you have to engage the record playback switch, which is lurking up there, in order to get it to work. Otherwise, you just get two lots of sound through at once. Dear, oh dear. Now, I had a very similar unit to this until not long ago, and sold it to Adam, Vintage Sounds 1992. And the one difference with my unit was that it hadn't got the high-speed dubbing thing, and I begin to wonder whether it was a bit of a liability, because this one certainly took some getting going. The main belts in it are flat belts, and that was no problem getting hold of those. But like any deck that's got twin decks and one of them records, of course it's going to be the recording one that sees most use. Because if you're taping something, be it from the playback deck or the radio, then this deck is going to be going, isn't it? And of course, yep, you've guessed it, it's completely and totally worn out. The main bearings are worn out on the capstan shaft. Fortunately for Adam, I had another one in the shed in a wreck. The bearing on that was alright, so I was able to modify that, and thankfully most of the mechanism being made out of very hard sort of resin-like plastic, I was able to just withdraw the old one and press fit the new one back in, and then away we went again. The spring that holds the pinch roller down on the tape was also tired. It was a completely different shape to the one here. Adding fuel to my argument about this deck probably saw the most use because it's the recording one. The other thing was that the motor itself wasn't quite in line in relation to the frame of the mechanism, and that took some serious guesswork to sort that out and to get everything to run properly, because of course a flat belt, unlike a V belt, if things aren't dead in line, it'll tend to try and just throw itself off all the time. And tails are legion of the old driving belts in the factories, aren't they? The old line shafts going bang and throwing the belts and ripping people's arms off and that sort of thing. Thankfully, that sort of thing doesn't happen inside a ghetto blaster. Ah dear, yeah, so I've got to put the tape counter belt back here, which goes from the take up to the counter here. Counter's tiny, isn't it? You'd think they'd have a bigger one, really, especially with the high speed business going on. But it was always a bit of a gimmick, and it wasn't particularly good for the playheads on the machine, or come to that, the tape running at twice the normal speed. But yeah, let's see what sort of a job it made of it. You can, by the way, monitor the sound, and it sounds truly ludicrous. Everything sounds like Mickey Mouse, like that. A bit like Muslims do when they get upset. Oh dear. Rewind a bit. Well, that recording was made at twice the normal speed on the high speed side, and as you can tell, it doesn't sound too bad as it goes. This one is by far one of the better ones. The model was aimed squarely at teenagers' bedrooms, I should think. There you are. One strange thing about this machine is that it doesn't matter whether you're dubbing or not. Whenever the tape decks are in operation, both motors are running. And I would have thought that that too was undesirable. You only need the motor running in the one that you've got. Now, some models, later models, use the silver dollar flywheel thing in a most peculiar manner. They were like Siamese twins, if you like, semi-detached. And there was just the one motor on the back of it with two pulleys the same size, and it drove both decks. So on those, you will always see the capstan spinning on whichever deck you're not using. But with a design that's got separate motors for each deck, it does seem a bit strange to have the motor on all the time. The Toshiba PCG 610, I think, that I've got is like that cassette deck. All the time it's switched on, the motor is running. So, and again, it's not really that desirable. They used to do it with the old reel-to-reels and record players because a lot of those had shaded pole motors, and if you started them from dead, they'd take a few seconds to speed up to the correct speed. But with the DC servo motors they use on this sort of thing, that's not the case. You switch it on and within a split second, bang, it's there, isn't it? But, well, what do I know? I've only been doing it years. Oh dear, a friend of mine rang up from Kensington a bit earlier in London. Their life has been made miserable every summer by these Arabs driving round in fancy posh cars, high-powered things, like lunatics. They're not allowed to do this at home, of course, because even if you smile the wrong way, you're liable to get stoned to death, aren't you? So, yeah, nice, I do not think. But, and they don't seem to be taking it too seriously up there, the police, he says. I know what I'd do if I was the police chief, and get the old stingers out, and, go and puncture a few fancy tyres, and say to them, right, your car's going in the crusher, and you're on the next plane back to Dubai, Abdul. Goodbye, up yours. And once you've done that a few times, I don't think you get these so-called tourists coming back and making everybody's bloody lives a misery, do you? Anyway, on that slightly cynical note, I shall away.